Daniel Sports Central, we go for our next team prediction of this offseason, and this could be over the North Carolina Tar Heels, a team that went 9-5 overall in the 2022 season. This was a strong team last season that took a couple of close losses towards the end of the season, so kind of a disappointing finish to a great season for North Carolina. But how this team be in 2023 and why I think this team could potentially be a dark horse national contender in the 2023 season is what we'll be talking about here today. We'll be analyzing this team and predict their schedule game by game in this video. Let's get started with a quick recap of 2022. Once again, the record was 9-5, and this team did lose each of their last 4 games. But overall, a really good season for this team. They started the season 9-1, only had 1 loss heading into the last 2 games of the regular season. Had 3 excellent wins to start the season. Lost to Notre Dame, which Notre Dame, a solid team last season. That was a disappointing loss, though, 45-32. Beat Virginia Tech the next week 41-10. Beat Miami on the road by 3. Beat Duke on the road by 3. Turns out Duke was a solid team last season. Took care of Pitt, no problem, 42-24. Beat Virginia on the road 31-28. Took care of Wake Forest in a close one, 36-34. And then lost to Georgia Tech. This was a bit of a confusing loss here, losing to Georgia Tech 21-17. And then the very next week took on NC State on Black Friday. Took the loss there in double overtime, 30-27. So 2 close, brutal losses to finish out the regular season. Took on Clemson in the ACC Championship, and Clemson won that one 39-10. Clemson really improved over the course of 2022. They were playing pretty well towards the end of the season, but they did lose the ACC Championship there 39-10. They played Oregon in the Holiday Bowl. This was a close one here, an outstanding matchup. Honestly, it probably was one of the best matchups of bowl season, but the Ducks did win in the end 28-27. So those 4 losses to finish out the season were definitely disappointing. This team was very much within contention to be a 10 or 11 win team last season, but it was just those close losses towards the end of the year. But I mean, you look forward to 2023, this team definitely shows a lot of tremendous potential. Drake Maye coming back, and he is the next quarterback for North Carolina. I mean, you remember Sam Howell, he was outstanding with this team, and Drake Maye is the next guy. He was outstanding last season, 4,300 yards, 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, a 66% completion rate. Also rushed for nearly 700 yards and 7 touchdowns. He was the lead rusher on this team, and his passing stats were outstanding. So he's a legit quarterback, and he definitely brings tremendous potential to this team. And that's a big reason why I could see this team being a big contender in 2023 is because of him and because of the consistency that he brings to this team. And I mean, if you look at the backfield, Elijah Green coming back, British Brooks also coming back. Of course, he was injured last season, so he's returning from injury. Backfield looks good. You do lose Hampton, who put up nearly 450 yards last season, 7 touchdowns, but at least you got some good depth in the backfield. Plus, it helps you got a quarterback who is very much dual threat. And the receiving core, you do lose Josh Downs and Antoine Green, so your top 2 wideouts are both gone. Josh Downs last season, over 1,000 yards, 11 touchdowns. That's going to be a tough loss. Green, of course, was right around 800 yards and 7 touchdowns. So you do lose your top 2 wideouts, but you got J.J. Jones coming back. Same with your tight end in Bryson Nesbitt. So there's some good depth in the receiving core despite a couple of losses. The backfield looks good. Quarterback situation obviously is great with Drake Maye. So this offense looks really solid going into 2023. Should be one of the best offenses in the ACC, maybe even the best. And in the country, definitely could be the same. But you lose 2 on the O-line, 1 defensive lineman, 1 linebacker, and then 4 in the secondary. So defensively, things look really good except for in the secondary. You lose a few key players there. But defensively, this team should improve. Obviously, at times last season, the defense definitely could have been better. I mean, this offense was generally great. But at times, when you consider you remember back to week 1, it was the second game of the season for this team, but took on Appalachian State on the road. 63-61 was the final score there. This defense allowed 61 points, but this offense still managed to get the win there, which was huge. And I mean, you consider the Notre Dame loss, allowed 45 points there, allowed 39 to Clemson. I mean, so at times this defense was definitely not great, and the offense was pretty consistent. I mean, this offense should be great, just a matter of whether or not the defense can come through in those crucial situations. But is this team a true dark horse contender in 2023? I think this team has got all the potential in the world. We're going to look at the schedule in a second, but this is a team with tremendous potential. Drake Maye, I really like him a lot. It's a similar situation with Sam Howell. If you remember him, well, obviously you remember him if you're a North Carolina fan. But yeah, Sam Howell was great, really similar to what Drake May is doing right now. And I think this is, North Carolina the past few years with Mack Brown as the head coach. I mean, this has been a team very much in contention. They just have had yet to have a huge breakthrough and win the ACC, maybe even get to the college football playoff. 2023 could very well be the year, with Clemson not being at that same level that they have been in the last couple of years. I mean, this is North Carolina's time for sure. But looking at the transfer portal and recruiting, Jacoby Criswell, quarterback, is off to Arkansas, but once again, it's Drake May's job. So really not too concerned about him. Devontae Walker, receiver, is coming in from Kent State. You got Nate McCollum also coming in from Georgia Tech. So you had some depth there to the receiving core. Willie Lampkin, offensive lineman, is coming in from Coastal Carolina. Chris Collins, edge rushers, off to Minnesota. Rod Dilworth, linebackers, off to East Carolina, and then you bring in Amari Gaynor from Florida State. So at least you bring in a few key players defensively, especially in the defensive secondary. That's really where you need it, and I think that's going to be huge to add in some depth into the defensive secondary in particular, and you'll see that here. I mean, this team is losing a few players, of course. Tony Grimes, same with Dante Balfour, and then Don Chapman. But at least you got Elijah Hudson coming in, same with Armani Chapman, Derek Allen, and Antavius Lane. So there is some good potential coming in for the defensive secondary, which is where it's needed. I mean, defensively, things look pretty good. Otherwise, on the D-line and the linebacking situation. So defensively, that looks pretty good. Recruiting-wise, you're 30th in the country, 4th in the ACC, 6 4-stars coming in, and then 14 3-stars. So recruiting overall looks really good as well. So there's a lot of potential on this team coming in. A lot of young talent as well. And I've got this team at an 8 out of 10 on the future forecast meter. Future is still bright for North Carolina. This is a team that is, I feel like they're just waiting for that time to break through and have an outstanding season. And they've had some great seasons for this program in recent time. It's just a matter of when they can finally take that next step and maybe get to the college football playoff, or at least win an ACC title for that matter. So it's just a matter of when for North Carolina. This team is very talented right now, and let's take a look at the schedule now. So you start the season with a big game against South Carolina, and that is going to be in a neutral location there in Charlotte. So, I mean, South Carolina had a really strong finish to 2022, but for 2023, I just don't know if they're going to be quite to the level that some are expecting. They're losing a lot of talent, a lot of key talent, which some might not recognize. So they're definitely a wild card team. They could be good, but I also wouldn't be surprised if they definitely disappointed. Then you got App State in week 2 at home. Then Minnesota comes to town. Interesting matchup there. And then Pitt on the road in week 4. You got your bye week, and then Syracuse at home, Miami at home, Virginia at home. So you've got an early bye week, but at least you got 3 home games after that. So you're at home for a good month there. And then road trip to Georgia Tech. You got Campbell at home, Duke at home, Clemson on the road, and then NC State on the road to finish out the regular season. So a couple of big games there to finish out the regular season. And so it's an interesting schedule, and your non-conference schedule isn't extremely easy. But looking at the first month of action, South Carolina, I do have you beating them. So I could see South Carolina being decent. I think that's going to be a close game, one of the bigger games of week 1. And honestly, whoever wins that matchup between North Carolina and South Carolina, I could see honestly having a great season. So the winner of that one, I think that's going to tell a lot about how the season goes for both teams. But then at App State in week 2, you beat them easily. Minnesota comes to town. Minnesota is really going to have several question marks at the beginning of the season. No more Mo Ibrahim. That offense is going to be atrocious next season. That defense could be good, but their offense, I'm not too confident in. So I think you beat Minnesota in a close one. I think they hang in there. A lower scoring matchup maybe, but North Carolina does win it. And then Pitt on the road. I do think you lose to Pitt here. I do think you're the better team in comparison to Pitt, but this would be a close maybe. And honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if Pitt was slightly favored here with them being at home. But I do think you lose this one. This is a very winnable game, but I do have a loss here. So you're 3-1 heading into October. Syracuse beat them easily. Miami and Virginia, both closer games. Especially the Miami game could be a really close one. Could go either way. But I do have you beating them, and then Virginia as well. And then Georgia Tech on the road, you take care of them. Obviously disappointed last season with the loss against them at home, but I think you get it done this season with an easy win. So that puts you at 7-1 heading into November. And quite honestly, I mean, this team could very well be 8-0 heading into November. I do think this team loses one game somewhere in the first 2 months, whether that's against Pitt. I've got it against Pitt, but it could be a home loss. as well. But I do have this team taking a loss somewhere in the first couple of months. But all the games are very winnable. This is a team that could very well be undefeated still heading into November. You got Campbell and Duke both at home. I have you beating both teams, but be careful about the Duke game. I do think Duke next season could be decent. They definitely surprised a lot in 2022. There were several surprise teams, and in particular, Kansas and Duke, two teams that are usually bottom feeders in their respective conferences. Both were decent to their standards last season. So, but Duke, I do see them being decent. I do think you beat them at home in a close one. Then you got Clemson on the road, a really tough place to play. I'm going to be favoring Clemson here. I do think the Tigers get it done. At that point in the season, they should be playing some really good football. So I got Clemson winning that game. I really like Kate Klubnik, what that team's doing. They're definitely on the rise right now once again. But that is, I mean, if you can beat Clemson on the road there, that puts you in a really good position heading into the NC State matchup, which I do have you beating the Wolfpack on the road there after Clemson, but also a close game there. So I got 10-2 for the record for North Carolina, but this team has got all the potential in the world to go 11-1 this upcoming season. I've got this team either 10 or 11 wins with a returning production and everything. If you can get it done in those close games, that's going to be the key for this team, and I could very well see this team being even better than 10-2. In fact, I've got the ceiling at 12-0 for North Carolina. I'll be honest in saying I do think this team takes at least one loss somewhere in the season. I mean, I've got 2 for this team, but once again, 10-11 wins very much where I think this team will be. The floor is 7-5. That's the worst possible record you could have this season. I think 7-5 and 12-0 are pretty unlikely, but anywhere between 8 and 11 wins is the most likely. And honestly, I'd narrow that down to 10 or 11 wins. The way the schedule sets up, things are pretty favorable. You do have a couple of Power 5 non-conference games, which can be a bit concerning. Maybe those are going to be your tougher ones. Or a couple of trap games potentially, but you do have Minnesota at home. That's very much a beatable team. In South Carolina, I think you can get it done against them as well. But yeah, I do have 10-2 for North Carolina, but let me know your thoughts in the comments below on this team, and I appreciate you guys all watching as always. Stay tuned for more from All Sports Central. Catch you on the next one.